Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the My Collaborative Team Roundtable. Today's roundtable uh, consists of mental health professionals who practice collaboratively around the country, and we welcome everybody. I think that Eric has told us that we have a great amount of enthusiasm for this, so let's get going by introducing folks, and we'll start as close to me as I can think of. In South Florida is Karen Sachs. Karen, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself and let us know how you practice, where you practice, and how you practice?
Okie doke. My name is Karen Sachs. I'm a mental health professional, and my specialty is, as a therapist, is invisible pain, and also relationship communication, family counseling, divorce, big divorce, working with children and families. I am a parenting coordinator and a facilitator, a collaborative facilitator and a mediator. I'm licensed in both Illinois and Florida,
And
and I
you've
am
been
a proud
practicing,
member of MCT.
thank you for the plug. How long
Yes,
have you been practicing collaboratively?
I've been practicing collaboratively 10 years.
Okay, so let's move across the coast to Roxanne Permsley. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm from the other coast, correct? I'm from Sarasota, Florida. I'm also a licensed mental health counselor who serves in the collaborative group as the facilitator and child specialist when we get one in our county, or a coach when we get them in our county as well. In my clinical practice, but predominantly I do a lot of work related to attachment and communication. I work with a lot of adolescents who think I'm wonderful in opposition to their parents, and do a lot of couples work, working sometimes with a couple together, knowing that that's the joint client, but often working with them individually as well to provide them enough nurturing and support so they can then go back and support the
And
other.
you've been practicing collaboratively for how long?
For about 10 years as well.
Okay. Now we move to the center of the country, to Cincinnati, Ohio, and Bernadette Johns. Dr. Johns, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Bernadette Johns. I'm a licensed psychologist. I have the unusual distinction of having trained as a social worker, a clinical counselor, and a psychologist. I'm your classic overachiever, I guess.
We haven't heard from everybody, but keep going.
Right. So I've been practicing in the collaborative group in Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Academy of Collaborative Professionals, for about 7 years. We have a quite a large group. My mental health practice is I specialize as a trauma therapist and also a systemic relationship therapist, either marital therapy, family therapy. So this is kind of a natural extension for me, being a systemically oriented therapist. The mental health neutral in this part of the country is referred to as a family relations specialist. And so I kind of facilitate the process in the collaborative process.
Thank you. And going all the way to the West Coast, where it's the middle of the afternoon, we have Beth Proudfoot. Beth, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I am a marriage and family therapist here in California. And I had actually my own collaborative divorce in 2007. So I experienced collaborative as a client first. And I've been doing it for about 7 years. I probably have had 50 cases or so. And I have been child specialist in many cases. I have been a coach in a 2-coach model in many cases. And I have been a sole coach facilitator in other cases. So I've kind of run the gamut.
Well, thank you. So I've had the opportunity to speak with you each individually, and with some of you meet you for the first time. Some of you I know from the My Collaborative Team happy hour, to which everybody is invited tomorrow. And I learned some fascinating things that I'm going to throw open for discussion. One is that the same task or the same person doing that task goes by a variety of names in different collaborative groups, which I suspect determines how you function, and more importantly, how you may be seen by the rest of the collaborative team. So I'd like to address, if to begin with, what you see yourself, or in what role you see yourselves, and what are the barriers as a mental health professional to functioning in that role, because that's something we all discussed individually. So the floor is open. Who wants to start? Bernadette,
All
thank you
right.
for volunteering.
All right. So I see my role as a facilitator of the process. If I generally say to clients, this divorce process is about 25% legal and 75% emotional. There are layers and layers of emotional detail. And as we all know, when people are highly stressed, they don't take in information. And the divorce process can feel very complex, and it can be objectively very complex. And so a part of my role is to make sure that everybody is understanding what's going on, to make sure everybody has a voice in the process, and that their needs and interests are attended to, and also managing the process in the room. You've got two professionals, possibly three if there's a financial neutral, and the divorcing parties. And so that's a lot of energy and potentially competing interests. And my role is to pay attention to all that and make sure that the process proceeds smoothly while people are being heard. And on the backside of that, I also coach the attorneys on issues of, timing and general approach. When is the best time to approach this issue versus that, and how to communicate in a way that the clients can hear and really take in what's happening. And of course, then there's the parenting. That's the other piece.
Karen, you were gonna.
I couldn't agree with Bernadette more. Absolutely. All those things you mentioned are so important. And the other thing I tell them is, tell me what you need. Let me help you through this. Because part of this is helping them feel comfortable with the team and knowing that if you have an issue with anybody, or any part of the team, whether it be your attorney, the other attorney, you're embarrassed to say something to the financial, well, I'll help you. And the parenting is so important. Not only filling out the plan, but helping to educate about, or telling them and helping them with the development of the kids and what may be good for them.
Do they do things differently on the West Coast, Beth, or Bernadette and Karen just speaking to the choir?
No, I think that in many ways, we take this role because we're mental health professionals and we know how to do it. We know how to manage the system, right? And so that doesn't change. I think we call ourselves different things. I feel like sometimes that every collaborative practice group is reinventing the wheel. They have their own different idea about the different roles and what they mean and who does what. Here in Silicon Valley, we pretty much always do a two-coach model, which means the coach is not the facilitator.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so
for us folks on the East Coast
model, yeah, each party has their own attorney and their own coach, and we call ourselves communications coaches. And so we're aligned. We're not neutral. We're aligned. And what we have found, and then we work together. We co-mediate the parenting plan. So we meet with the lawyer and the client and all the pre-meetings, right? We call it the pod, is your coach and your lawyer. That's your pod, and you're going to meet and prepare for each meeting with your pod. But we're also part of all of the full team meetings. And both of us are watching for all of the things that Bernadette talked about within that meeting, but we're not also having to facilitate the meeting. We're actually kind of observing and jumping in when we see things going on.
So who keeps track of things, or who keeps people on track in a two-coach model? If I may, what I'm hearing is that in the one facilitator model, if we'll call it that, or the one family relationship specialist model, that one person has to keep their eye on everybody. And then if you've got two pods meeting, who keeps an eye on the pods and how does that work?
It happens that here in Silicon Valley, we have really great financials who actually do the facilitation of the meetings, and oftentimes act as case manager for the process. So they are the ones keeping everyone on track, sending out the minutes, making sure that things run smoothly. You know, what's happening next? What, you know, so, and it may be that we invented the wheel this way because we happen to have really great financials who are very people smart, who are really great mediators and really great facilitators. So anyway, that's how it runs. Sometimes we'll appoint one of the coaches, and I've done this in some cases, as the case manager. So the case manager is the one managing the case, not necessarily facilitating the meetings, but managing the case in terms of setting up meetings and all of that stuff. So,
And I'm seeing wide eyes on the East Coast thinking, how do we get a second coach in here? Is that something you're thinking about, Roxanne?
We're always wishing that we would get a second coach involved. I think we took a while for people to understand the necessity of having a facilitator to begin with. Initially, many people felt, and this is when we first called them mental health coaches or facilitators, we always had the parties who identified that they weren't crazy. Maybe their spouse was, but they weren't, and it was an unnecessary person and cost. However, at this point in time, I think all of the attorneys have identified that they do need the facilitator, and everybody else has used the word parenting, and I think to a great degree, we're parenting the whole group, that it's setting the structure, it's setting the example, it's making sure everybody has a fair turn. But I think for us to get to a two-coach model is going to be a bit more of a struggle. Although when I hear it each time, it sounds to me as if it would make each person feel very much nurtured and cared for in a way that is above and beyond perhaps what the one person can do. But I think all of us, at least I know Karen pretty well, we try to spend an amount of time individually with each of the parties as need be. So each of them also feels supported, and then meet with them and their attorney. So I think
So let me follow up on that and ask each of you how you do that specifically. What happens? I'm certain that everybody who's watching or will be watching has had some collaborative practice. And I'm also certain that some people who are watching have just taken the training and don't know what goes on outside the training, meaning what happens outside the team meetings? What's your role? What's your function? What's your task outside the 2 or 3 hour team? And maybe those team meetings go 1 or 2 or 5 hours, I don't know, but outside the team meeting. Somebody want to start that? Karen?
Well, the first thing I do is get in touch with each of the couple, each person individually. Just introduce myself and say, hey, this is how you doing, and just, you know, that comfortable spiel. And then I say to them, we need to meet. But before I do any of that, right after I say, hi, how you doing, and explain to them about my role, I'll send them my agreement. So that gives me a chance to get their consent to even speak to the team. So I will send them my agreement, and then I'll speak with the couple to see how they're interacting and try and get, you know, a read on them before I call the meeting.
Let me just, because I have the advantage of having spoken to everybody here. You say you meet with the couple. Do you meet with each spouse in sequence, or do you meet with the couple together?
Together.
I'm sorry?
See how they're interacting with each other.
So
everybody, I
just
do meet with them together, because when I've introduced myself, 9 times out of 10, they're giving me their whole thing in a nutshell, whatever it is. So you hear their side, you hear the other side, and then you really see a little of what's going on. At the same time, I'm getting those papers signed so I can speak to the team and they will hopefully have done the attorneys and the, again, forgive me, I don't know the two-coach model, but the attorneys will get in touch, and the financial will at least introduce themselves before our pre-meeting.
Bernadette, what do you all do in Cincinnati?
Well, what generally happens is an attorney will call me up and say, we have this case, are you available? And the process from there is I arrange to meet with the couple individually. I'll have a brief telephone conversation with them just to kind of answer, to sort of introduce myself and answer any initial questions they have about, why the heck do we need an FRS? That's additional.
That's family relationship specialist.
Right.
Okay, just being clear.
So I then schedule an individual meeting with each of them. My need at that point is to get as much information from each of them in a circumstance in which they feel free to speak, to sort of say what's on their mind, even if it's biased, because I want to know their biases as well. And in that, I want to get to know a bit about who they are and how they tell the story of their marriage and its demise. So I get a sense of what they're bringing to the table. From there, I get in touch with the attorneys and say, I've met with the couple, we're free to schedule the first team meeting. And in the pre-brief, the professionals meeting before that first meeting, I might, brief the attorneys on what I've discovered, just systemically, not individual nitty gritty personal information, but here are the themes that are coming to the table today. Here are the issues that I think we may need to address up front. Here are some of the potential challenges as I see them. And here's how I think we might be able to confront these challenges. And
so you're giving it sounds a little bit like, and I know Roxanne wants to jump in here, but it sounds a little bit like you've done your mental health intake, if you will. You've identified the system that's going on, how the demise of that system, and then you're looking for strengths and weaknesses, and you're reporting back to the team about what to look for, because you've got a different lens than the financial person, certainly, and certainly than the attorneys. Roxanne, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think what you'll discover if you're doing this work is you end up doing it the way you always do things, which is reflective of your own style and personality. And it does vary from group to city to state to location. In Sarasota, the two attorneys pick the two neutrals. We have a very brief, almost superficial call from the attorneys together, identifying the smallest amount of identifying information. At that point in time, I tend to write a very brief letter to each of the people saying that I've been identified and I will be getting in touch. I then, as Karen said, have a very brief phone call, at which time I tell them that I'm going to be sending them some forms and setting up an individual meeting. The forms are my contract and things of that sort, but it's a questionnaire that includes the things that you mentioned, but also things about, do you think your partner will be forthcoming? Have you ever had these situations happen to you in the marriage? What are the issues that I should be concerned about? How am I going to tell? And much of this continues in an hour-long individual meeting. How am I going to tell when you're getting to the end of your rope?
May I ask, is this a question
that I see that's going to bring up an argument in your spouse?
Is this a questionnaire that you have them complete for you?
I have them complete a questionnaire, which is, yes, matters about the marriage, and marriage is about what they think will happen in the process and how they think the process will go and what will make it difficult. And I also have what are the things that you're looking forward to out of this process and going forward in your life.
Beth?
So that we're heading also looking forward.
Beth.
So I do exactly what all of you guys do, except I do it when I'm doing a two-coach model. I'm only meeting with my client at the beginning. I'm not meeting with both clients together. But when we usually have our first coaching meeting before the sign-on meeting. And part of the goal of that meeting is to understand where the clients' higher selves are located. So we do a lot of talking about what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? Why did you choose collaborative? What's important to you about your kids? You know, we're trying to get them into, you know, this is Stu Webb's thing, right? We want to take people who are in fear and anger and bring them up into love and generosity. And part of that is our just testing the waters out, right? As Bernadette was talking about, what's going on in the system, and can we get them in? Can we get them there? Can we get them to a point of agreement about what's important about
Beth, if I may,
etc.
I don't want to forget this. Roxanne, I am certain that if I invite you to send Eric a copy of your questionnaire, he would be happy to disseminate it to the
Of course.
attendees. It sounds like a great instrument. But Beth, I'm struck by, I'm always struck by what happens on the West Coast, and it seems so different. But how do the two coaches in the two-coach model communicate? If you're coach to mom and Roxanne is coach to dad, how do you explain to Roxanne your perception of your clients or your mentees' perception of the other spouse? How does Roxanne come back to you and say, hey, you know, my client said, hey, this, how do you two, because it almost sounds like, and obviously it's been working or you wouldn't be doing it, but it sounds like a parallel process to the adversarial process, that you don't have a middle person who gets to see both sides.
No, we try really, we have a lot of joint coaching meetings. There's a lot of meetings with both of us in the room. We do the whole parenting plan with both coaches in the room. And we have a pre-meeting to every meeting where we talk about the case. We have a debrief at every meeting where we talk about the case. We actually work really hard to not be aligned to the extent that we can't see the other client's point of view. So we check things out with each other all the time. Well, you know, what I'm hearing from my client is, you know, this version of reality, so that the other coach can tell us, well, I'm hearing from my client this totally different version of reality. And we're mental health professionals. We know that actually it's a system, right? and that we're not going to, and we're collaborative professionals, so that we know that we start to get overly aligned with our clients and we just failed the entire system, that we have to stay at the point where we're trying to understand, we're both trying to understand the whole system. And when it works well, it's a dance. We're really working off of each other, understanding the projections that each client has about the other coach, you know, and really working at as part of a system.
So Bernadette, as a social worker in her past, may appreciate this. Early in my family systems training, there were a group of great, actually women social workers, and I want to come back to the role of women in collaborative in a moment. But one of the exercises that they would do would be, and I do this with my adolescent patients sometime, is I'll have them sit in my chair, right? And they get to ask me the questions. And early in the systems training, sometimes you have the spouses sit in each other's chair and take on their role. Do you, in the two-coach model, ever get to then spend some alone time, if you will, or individual time with the other coaches, I'll call it client? Is that an experiment you've ever tried?
No.
No.
We stay in our silos to some extent, and we work together as we try to work together as collaborative teams, don't we? All
Well,
the
you're
time,
obviously modeling, right? You're modeling good behavior.
For them, how we're solving problems together, how we communicate with each other, right? We're doing that, you know, modeling of a system that works, right?
Bernadette, did you have some comment as a systemic person to this?
I was so impressed at what a fabulous idea that might be. You know, what a great notion to just kind of have the coaches swap seats, figuratively or physically,
or swap clients.
Possibly. I think that might be a difficult dance for the clients, but what an incredibly powerful, potentially powerful exercise for the coaches to actually swap places and sort of see things from the other client's perspective. I think it could be really interesting.
So let me ask, Roxanne, yes?
Well, one of the things that was mentioned a few times is that I think the other part that's extremely important is after we have, as the facilitator or the communication specialist or the coach, had the opportunity to meet with the parties, it's important that we share the information that we have gathered with the other professionals on the team and give them the data that we have learned that will be important for us to know in the meetings that we have together. And then subsequently, as I said, Beth said, we're always meeting prior to the meeting to identify what's going on. At the end of the meeting, what we could have done better and differently,
Mhm.
and then continue to monitor, has the homework been done, what we need to do, while we as the facilitator continue to meet with everybody as needed, either together or separately.
So the information that you've gathered on this, we'll call it the intake questionnaire or the systems questionnaire, do you share that with each spouse's attorney? A, do you share both spouses' information with both attorneys? And thirdly, does anybody use another form of that questionnaire? I'm thinking of the separation divorce readiness indicator that comes out of Canada. Does anybody do anything like that?
Now, I can tell you what I do is I send out the questionnaire. I ask them to send it back to me before the individual meeting. And then I meet with each of them for an hour. Some people want more time than that, obviously. And then I summarize what I think is going to be relevant and important and present it to the entire team.
Mm.
If there are some specific things that come up that I think are only pertinent to that one attorney, then I would approach that individually with the attorney, safeguarding the other person's well-being.
And Beth, you have a questionnaire as well that you use?
Yeah, that I stole from somebody who gave a talk at CP Cal, I think. With their permission, we had permission to steal it. A great questionnaire with questions like, okay, so the divorce is over, your collaborative divorce is over, and it's been a huge success. Why? What was it about
Oh,
that?
I like that.
Oh,
Right.
me
The
too.
divorce is over and it's been a huge failure. Why? Right? It's a great question. It's so rich, right? And we want to get information about people's interests from the beginning. We want them to know that that's what we're curious about,
Well,
is what their interests are. So using the questionnaire can be very helpful for that.
and that's a questionnaire that you might share as well?
Yes.
Sure, happy to. Well,
Okay.
it's not really
Okay.
I think it's
But it
I can
sounds like it sounds like one of the things that you do. I do this in working on a parenting plan. I give both parents a template of a parenting plan, typically from the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, because it's very specific. And I find that about 90% of whatever it is they've been arguing about on the parenting plan doesn't show up that way. They're in agreement about most things, and what's left over is fundamental. And that's usually either religion, choice of school, or extracurricular activities. But it gets them out of the verbal part of things into writing, all right? And even if they're not good writers, it gets them to sit and think and put into writing what they're thinking about, as opposed to what they're thinking about coming directly out of their mouths at a team meeting. So yes, Karen.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. My question for Beth is how, or maybe, and I've been fortunate enough to sit in on some of the, some of the workshops, but how did you introduce having the two coach model? Because we have enough problems here having people agree to one coach. The financial part of the two coach is a definite issue. I can see some of what you're saying, but this is important because that holds us
Right.
back.
How do you sell what you're asking, if I may,
Yes.
Beth, to translate? And Beth is really good at selling collaborative. She's going to share a secret or two in a moment, but
too.
and I'll tell her what the secret is. But the question that you're asking is, how do you sell collaborative, let alone two coaches?
Two
Or if you've
coaches.
sold it, how do you sell the second coach?
So here's the thing. It's not the clients that you need to convince. It's the lawyers. Let's be clear. It's the lawyers who need to have the experience and really understand the value add that the coaches have. And once the lawyers get it and they're like, oh, it's so much easier for me to do a collaborative divorce because the coaches do everything. I just kind of sit back and like every once in a while tell people what the law would be about this, and then I'm done. I write it up at the end. That's the lawyer you want, right? Who's like understanding the value add that the coaches have. And once everyone's clear that this is really important, you don't have to sell it to the clients at all. The lawyers say this is the way we do collaborative divorce.
So Beth, what you're saying is that, and there are a bunch of competing risk management issues, which I'd like to come to in a moment, given the different professions. But what you're saying is, I think something that Ed Sachs and I presented at an FACP conference, which is let the lawyers entertain their clients in the living room while the non-lawyers work in the kitchen preparing the meal. That was the metaphor that he used. And that what you're saying is, if you want your clients to eat well, let us do the work. Let us prep the meal for you. Let the financial person do all the numbers crunching, and let the mental health people work on the parenting plan and the emotional sort of stuff. And you get to have the benefit of that work. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So which
I
leads me.
I taught a
Go on. You taught a class.
I taught a class last weekend at CP Cal about how we inspire the public, how we inspire ourselves, how do we get out of thinking that we're marketing collaborative practice and get into helping the world to understand how important this paradigm shift is. And one of the people in the class said, you know what, the way I explain it to people is that divorce is kind of like surgery. You want to get it right the first time.
That's great. That's great.
That is great.
I so love that metaphor. And when you are, as a professional, are really clear, like I am super clear, having two coaches makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. And I think it makes the divorce a lot more efficient. So
And the
yeah,
process,
oh yeah.
So let's talk about,
because you have all that emotional support.
So let's talk about barriers to efficiency. All right. One of the subjects that I brought up to each of you, and each of you had a unique perspective on this, but I'll ask it this way. What are the barriers in working with lawyers? What is it that you find when you're working with a lawyer that keeps you from doing your job well? And what is it that you find in working with a lawyer that allows you to do just what you're saying, is to go ahead with the surgery? Anybody want to jump in? Karen.
I think when they get too attached to the law, and even though you want to do a legal thing, but when you're dancing on the head of a legal pin, when people are so emotional, and sometimes they'll give so much more if they just hear the other person, that I think it's them giving the law more than the process, not making a total paradigm shift, if you will.
So someone commented, and I'm going to read this comment to you. Eric passed it along. It is conflict that causes high fees, not the coaches. So what you're saying is when the law comes into collaborative, well, the law says this, or the law doesn't say that, permit that sort of not having made the paradigm shift causes extended time in the process. Is that a fair statement, Roxanne?
Yes, it is. And I think we do have to sell that. The other thing, when you asked what is a difficulty with the attorneys, I know for me, when I first started doing collaborative, I usually worked for an attorney. I was hired to evaluate a client, or I was doing a social investigation, and I saw them as a bit of the authority to whom I was reporting. And I think it was my understanding that I was an equal player in the field. And it took almost a while for some of them to recognize that it wasn't my job to write the notes, to write the agenda, to take the meetings, to form the meetings, that I had a bigger purpose than being the secretarial support. So I think what gets in the way sometimes is sort of being comfortable enough to assert yourself, or to assert myself, I'll say, into the role. And the thing that helps is having a close enough relationship with the attorneys on the team so that you can be very open and honest and forthcoming and share with them above and beyond just in your meetings, your debriefing, your pre-organization. So you trust each other and can be fully forthcoming. And that's what makes it work for me.
Bernadette, you were going to jump in here.
Yeah, I think that that confidence is so important. I think that sometimes, you know, what can be a barrier is, I know when I first started doing collaborative work, I saw the attorneys as the authority figures and didn't want to push back too much. I don't do that anymore. And when attorneys become kind of forget that they're in a collaborative process and start acting like they're in the courtroom, I have the confidence then to push back and say, hey, you know, this is a collaborative process, and it might be more helpful if you put this issue in this way, or you might want to pull back on the kind of the win-lose kind of language. And that's really a kind of a personal evolution that I've gone through as well, being able to sort of call out an attorney. Whereas initially I used to think, oh, well, I guess that's just the way it is. But the other barrier, speaking of barriers to our efficiency, is I think the attorney's confidence in the role of the family relations specialist or the coach or the mental health neutral it tends to be communicated sometimes, so that if a client says to their attorney, why do we need this extra person? It's extra expense. If the attorney can't answer that question with confidence, it maintains that uncertainty.
Also diminishes the confidence in whatever it is you're attempting to do.
Correct.
Yeah. Beth, you've been nodding your head the entire time. Both Roxanne and Bernadette have some comment about that.
I totally agree. This is a problem apparently countrywide that, you know, lawyers come from a training, right? And their training is to look for the negative, look for the possibilities of the negative in the future, advocate for their client, right? And those things they've been deeply trained in all of this stuff, and they have to unlearn it in order to do collaborative. And I get it, that's a hard thing to unlearn. It's easier for us to transition into this process than it is for lawyers, I think.
So what do you do, or how do you educate, and both Roxanne and Bernadette have been very diplomatic in their explanation. And I know that Roxanne has shared with me that she's been at the receiving end of not much appreciation on occasion and been told so. So how do you convey this in a way that is, and I don't mean practically like you say things in a certain way, but how do you, in a discussion in my collaborative team happy hour a few weeks ago, there was a discussion about finding one's voice as a mental health professional. How do you find your voice? Does that come from experience? Does that come from watching and understanding the system better? Does it come from your own coaching? Does it come from watching a few cases? How do you come to find your voice? Karen?
I think it comes from all of the above. And as you were speaking, I sensed something to the couples, again, the one coach model, which talks about the words. The words you use are so important. And just as we were talking, I said to myself, I'm going to send it to the attorneys as well, because these are so important. You know, it's in our MHP training, and I do love family relations specialist as opposed to neutral facilitator or coach. But absolutely, that was a great idea because words are so important. And I think as a facilitator, it's the words that sometimes attorneys use that push the other clients away. Sometimes it could be you're a client, pushing the other client too hard, which makes your client feel bad. And it's the
So,
words that he uses.
so one of the things I hear you saying is that some of the coaching or the relations education or the whatever it is we want to call it has to do with also setting aside and chatting with the attorneys and giving them feedback about their presentation in a meeting. I remember my first collaborative case. One of the attorneys, it was his first collaborative case, and you could see in his eyes that he wanted to leap out and say something that was going to just take the entire process off the rails. And he would almost get lifted out of his seat. His eyes would get wide. He'd take a deep breath and he'd go back. And this happened a few times. And the clients were quite unaware of this, but the other attorney and I were. And at the end of it, I gave him great praise for not acting like a lawyer. And he had a good sense of humor and laughed, and he recognized that what was going on. But I think that's probably what you're all saying is one of the roles. But I want to comment on something else as we get towards winding down. In putting this panel together, if you notice, there are 4 women here talking about this. I don't see any men other than myself on the screen. What is it about, or is it in your particular practice groups? Are there more women available to serve as the mental health component of a team? Or do attorneys, typically male, although not always, see women as more, as I think Bernadette talked about earlier on, malleable and therefore choose them? Is there a sexist thing going on in collaborative that we need to bring to everybody's attention? Or is it some other process? Or is it just luck of the draw that I got you 4 wonderful women to chat with?
I think if you even start with the number of people who are in the mental health field, the percentage of women is higher than men. And so I think we start with that as a format. I know in our group, we have 3 facilitators, 2 are a woman and 1 is a man. And we have more female attorneys, but I think it's the picking group. And I think that the facilitators like to be in that role of nurturing and engaging. I think in some ways it fits what we see as sort of a female style, sorry to say it, but it's kind of true. But I think the group from which we pick in terms of the mental health people are more likely to be women than men, percentage wise. And it starts there and everybody agreed. So, yeah.
Beth?
We have a lot of discussions. We've been having a huge amount of talk about how do we bring more diversity into collaborative practice. Diversity in our teams and diversity in the couples that are coming in to see us. And it's something I think that we all need to be thinking about. Is there a bias issue here, or is it just, I don't know, something else? And actually, it's led to a great discussion in our practice group about, do we have a bias here? Is that why we're attracting people that are, frankly, over 50 and white and mostly female? Are there ways that we can shake that up and open it up so that we get more diverse clients and more diverse people in our practice group? Youth, gender, right? Brown faces, let's see them. There's a lot that we need to be building diversity in collaborative practice, like everywhere. I mean, IACP is really concerned about this as well.
What is the composition of your various groups in terms of male, female, and then amongst the professions, male, female, and finally, generally speaking, people of color versus not? Bernadette, what is it like? You've got a very large practice group up in Cincinnati of about 90 folks, I think. Yes.
Yeah. Of the mental health professionals, 1 is male. Of the attorneys, goodness, I've never looked closely. It was always dominated by men, but there are way more of the more recent members are female. So it's probably closer to, if not 50-50, 55-45 male to female. And the financial neutrals are probably 60-40 male to female.
Roxanne?
I would say in our group, the predominant of people are relatively young because many of the older attorneys are not quite ready to change the way they're practicing. So I think that's one thing that's relevant. In terms of the facilitators, we have 2 women and 1 man, equal numbers of financial people, and the attorneys, I would say, are rather equal, possibly a little bit more loaded in the female grouping.
Beth?
Yeah, 50-50 on the financials. Like I think we have 1 male coach. And excuse me, all of the younger lawyers in our practice group are women. We have a sprinkling of men who are over 70. So.
That's quite a diverse population. Karen?
You know, I kind of agree with Bernadette and the others. As far as mental health in our group, I think we have 1 male in one of my groups, and right. Really, it's many more women for mental health, for financial, or I mean, for facilitators, for the financial group. I think there are more men, maybe, and for women, more young women
Younger
attorneys,
lawyers.
I think.
Yeah. So Carol Hughes has been a real supporter of my collaborative team, who I think Beth Proudfoot knows, writes, in our practice group, the clients select their professional team members, not the lawyers. Our original training in 2003 and going forward was that the professionals are co-equal. How do you think you would get that to happen in your practice group, where each of the lawyers would say, here's a list, go interview folks? How would that work for you, Bernadette? As opposed to the lawyer saying, you know, I work well with Bernadette, you should call her up.
Yeah, I think it could work really well if the lawyers could let go of that piece of power. I think they would have a really hard time letting go of that.
So we're back to power inequities that Carol Hughes is talking about, everybody being co-equal. Beth, you've got a smile on your face. How would that work?
This is exactly the way it works in our practice group. The clients choose sometimes lawyers, or actually a lot of cases come in through the mental health professionals. A huge number of cases come in through the mental health professionals. We help the clients to choose the lawyers, not the lawyers helping the clients to choose the mental health. So, and we really work hard on making it a co-equal situation.
Let's talk a little bit about what I said before, that you have some knowledge about. How do you get cases so that you can refer them to the lawyers? You know where I'm heading with this. You've been very instrumental in helping.
Yeah, we have this program called Divorce Options, which I understand that some groups, at least in Florida, are going to be adopting. So one way that we do this is, so it's a class, and it very neutrally goes through all the different ways you can get divorced in California. There's 4 processes that we talk about, including collaborative. And we have found that the very best sources for collaborative cases come from mental health professionals, couples therapists. So we want couples therapists to know about collaborative divorce. So we really work hard at getting couples therapists in particular to come to Divorce Options so that they understand for their clients what the options are, and so that they can refer their clients to Divorce Options. So monthly, hundreds of couples therapists hear from me that there's going to be this class, and that I do this thing called collaborative divorce, and that this is a great class for their clients to come to when they're first deciding about divorce and trying to understand what the process is. So I personally get a lot of referrals from couples therapists who may or may not have sent their clients to the class, but they're sending their clients to me because they have been to the class and they're recommending collaborative for their clients.
So you get to be the gatekeeper for the team, in a sense, as opposed to the other way around.
Right. when you're talking about power imbalance, that's where in collaborative right now, that's where it is. Where the power is who's getting the clients, I'm sorry to say. And it should be that way. And I prefer it not be that way. But I think if mental health professionals are feeling one down, just bring in your own clients and be the one who has your client hire the lawyer, right? Now that turns things around. Sorry, I didn't know how I got on this topic, but
I invited you
Great.
because we had this discussion, and I had this discussion with each of you, actually. But we're getting close to closing time, and in case I forget, I want to, so Carol Hughes has popped in. For anybody who's listening to us today, if you go to CPCal, California Collaborative Group, or Collaborative Professionals of California, so it's CPCal, there is on the divorce options page a listing of all the offerings in the state of California by all of the practice groups. I would suggest you go to the Silicon Valley group and watch Beth in action. She's a great presenter. It's typically on a Saturday morning. And I say this as a way of promoting divorce options for practice groups in South Florida, where half of the panelists are, and for Bernadette in Cincinnati. It's well worth watching. I also don't want to forget to invite everybody to go to our website, mycollaborativeteam.com, search around, and anybody who's watching today will be getting an invitation tomorrow from Eric to join us at the My Collaborative Team Happy Hour, which happens at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time, and is probably one of the more dynamic learning experiences outside of training. I think Karen would agree by her smile.
So
But
fun.
and fun. But you have to bring your own booze. And anybody who's watching who's not already a member, please go to mycollaborativeteam.com and explore membership for yourself. All right. So in closing, I'd like to go around starting at the West Coast, asking each of you what you might have learned that you didn't know, or what popped in your head. My God, there's a different way to cook food. There's this wonderful story about the little girl who's learning to cook from her mom, and they make meatloaf in 2 pans. And she says to her mom, "Why are we doing it this way?" She says, "Well, that's the way I learned to do it from grandma. Why don't you call grandma up?" And so the little girl calls grandma up, and she says, "Grandma, why do we cook meatloaf in 2 pans?" And grandma says, "Well, that's the way I learned it from my mother." And so she calls great grandma up and she says, "Great grandma, why does everybody cook meatloaf in 2 pans?" And great grandma says, "We couldn't afford a large pan when we were first married, so we had 2 pans." So I think there's an answer to every question. I'd like to know what you each learned, if you did, or what you might take away from today that you're going to bring back to your own practice or your practice group. Roxanne?
Not on the West Coast. I don't go first.
Well, you're the West Coast of Florida.
Oh, all right. I was paying attention. I think I learned again the diversity of ways that we operate, and I've found 2 new people that I could now contact. I think as Karen said, and you said, the Friday groups are wonderful because we do need other people who will teach us and tell us and show us, and we can share too. I think it's identifying other ways we can get cases, other ways we might approach presenting things to our clients, and how we help the attorneys recognize the value of what we do from the way other people are doing it as well.
And now to the real West Coast. Beth?
I just really love this movement. I love the smart people all over the world and all over the country who are trying to figure it out. You know, we have so much in common. And even though we're all kind of reinventing the wheel and exactly how we do it, to me, it's inspirational that how many people are involved with this all over the country. And it's just really fun to meet all of you and to understand how you do it, the way you do it. To me, that's just fascinating and fun. And I'm going to be like walking on air the rest of the day because I love this movement, and I love how we can communicate with each other together.
I'm going to ask a personal question in just a moment. Bernadette, what's your takeaway from today, from being part of this panel?
I could not agree more with Beth. I just realized as I was listening to Beth, I at the end of a tiring day, and it's been a very tough week, and frankly I was quite fatigued, and I just realized how energized I feel now. it's really something to network with other like-minded professionals
With
The-
different experiences as opposed to the training group you grew up with. Karen?
Absolutely. Bernadette, I can listen to your accent, having a Brooklyn accent. Yuck. All day long. All day long. Ditto for everything that everybody said. What a wonderful group of intelligent, like-minded people. And Beth, and the people who think about the two-coach model, it's been hard for me to grasp it, but from going to some of the California meetings, everybody's been so gracious at different states and including and helping us learn. I'm opening up my mind more and more. So I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, and my takeaway, if I may, in closing, and again, I want to invite everybody to think about joining my collaborative team, to go to the website and certainly come to the happy hour. My takeaway from having met individually with each of you and on this panel is that there is more than one way to cut a roast beef. There is more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to make meatloaf. And that without getting this, I think we all wait for the end of, if it's a statewide organization, for them to put on the end of the year a workshop, or for IACP in the fall to put on this workshop. And everybody goes and they come back talking about being energized. But I think the energy diminishes over the course of time between annual events, and the opportunity to think outside the box or inside someone else's framework. Oh my God, they do it that way. No one told me I could do that, but I can. They do. I think is the remarkable takeaway from this meeting. And I want to close with probably our most one of our most wonderful supporters is Carol Hughes, who writes this to all the panelists. Very well done. Thank each of you for your time and for your passion. And as the moderator, I want to thank each of you for your time and your passion and what you've shared today. And Eric, I want to thank you in the background for letting us host this. And I hope as many people as possible watch it and learn from it. Panelists, thank you.